I'm here with Ansley Fender, the founder and CEO of Atlas. Welcome to the show, Ansley.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Can you, for listeners who have never heard of Atlas before, can you just briefly explain what kind of services does Atlas offer for nonprofits?
For sure. So, Atlas is a grant and contract funding management software. So we service the post award side. So after you already have an award, we help with the financial performance and reporting management of all of that.
Yeah, tell me more about that. When we're talking about grant management, what all does that entail?
So many things, and I've heard different terms used throughout the industry. So, like I said, we're definitely post award. So essentially, when you get a grant, you have the budget that you have to track. You have to track sometimes even payroll down to the specific line item. It really sort of varies and can run the gamut. But typically, there's some financial tracking, and then obviously your funders want to know what you did with it. And it's not like we served meals like that. Yes, that is what you did, but that is not the outcome. There's a much bigger mission at stake here. So, how did that funding move your mission forward? And then there's final reporting. So, not only financial reporting, but a lot of funders now are looking for stories. They want to hear what you did because then they have to go back to the people who funded them and tell them what you did. So there's so many moving pieces, and sometimes it can take a back seat just out of necessity more than because people want it to.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that a lot of funders now are actually looking for stories. This is something that I think nonprofit leaders have wanted for a long time.
Yeah,
We know as nonprofit leaders that what we do cannot simply be defined by numbers. There's qualitative data there as well that we need to be collecting. So
for
tell
sure.
me, do you have advice for using Atlas or any sort of grant management system? How can we be collecting not only this quantitative data that helps to illustrate our outcomes, but also that qualitative data that grant funders are now looking for?
It's a really hard question, and it's something that we've wrestled with too, because how do you build an outcome metric feature if everyone tracks it differently? And that's really, really hard. And so, what I sort of go back to is at the end of the day, I don't care about headcount and saying I as a funder, I don't really care about headcount. I don't care about, widgets purchased. I care that we made a difference for you. That's at the end of the day what we're trying to do. So, what is it that you do? And nonprofits have to be really, really clear about that. But what are the programs in place? What is your big goal? And, you have to write that into the grant. But I think for a while it was tracking widgets, and people just don't care about that anymore. Um, and it's also really hard to track something like that. If you're counting, like I said earlier, meals served, someone's got to be standing there saying one, two, three, like that. That's dumb. So, I think it really is just a matter of that value proposition of what you do that no one else does and why you should be doing it, and then how you did it. And I think stories is such a great way to do that. You get one or two like really good case studies of I'm a person that was helped by this, and this is what happened, and this is how my life is better. You need to keep funding this organization.
Do you have any real life examples of clients who have used Atlas to do that really well?
Um, we're still in the phase where we're like going back and being like, so what did you do?
Yeah.
So I don't have a lot of like firsthand stuff, but just like anecdotally, um, there's there's a community foundation that we've that we've worked with that's like we don't do reports at all. Like we just don't have them. I'm like, that's really interesting. So why are we having this conversation? Like why would Atlas be useful to you? And they're like, well, we still need these stories. We still have to survive too as a funder. And in that, we also want the organizations that we're funding to to I hate to use the word professionalize because it sounds so condescending, but professionalize the financial tracking and reporting and like become a better version of their organization so that they could go get more funding. And so it's sort of this cyclical pattern where the funders really do want to help the recipients improve on this stuff, and the recipients really do want to give really good data to the funders and then leverage that into additional funding. So that's the biggest one, is just like anecdotally and talking to prospective customers, current customers. They're like, this just sort of causes that flywheel effect to happen, which is exactly what we're trying to do.
So we talked about a little bit about how sometimes nonprofit leaders aren't great about tracking information as they have their grant, and Atlas can help with that. But why do you think nonprofit leaders struggle with the grant management process and kind of wait for all the reporting until the end of the grant term sometimes?
I think it's just a nature of nonprofits, and it's not it's a time problem. There's never enough resources, there's never enough people, there's never enough money. And so something that seems like it's, well, that report's due 12 months from now, that's a tomorrow problem. And then it just keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until it's a today problem. And then, like, we've been contacted by potential customers that are like, so I have 2 years of stuff I need to get in this for something that's due next week. And I'm like, that's too late. Like, I'm happy to try, but I don't think we can get that done in any sort of meaningful way. And so, industry wide, like 20 to 30% of funding is going to manual grant admin in a spreadsheet, which is what most people use. Like, that is a ton of money that's never making it to the bottom line. That's not pushing your mission forward. And so what we find is, if you just go into the grant saying, we have to do this, we want to be a grant funded organization, which means we have to adjust our processes and adjust how we think about our finances to really sort of move into creating a very well funded cycle of grants. You have to do this stuff. And so I think it's just a matter of being like, hey, this is a long-term plan. We may not have more people. We're definitely not going to be able to create time. But if we rewrite how we do things, we do get time back. And it actually creates money for us without going to get more grants, because we're not spending so much, employee time on this type of stuff.
So, how does Atlas help with that process? How can nonprofit leaders use Atlas to improve their grant management processes?
That's a great question. So the first thing we do is start with the finances. So, a lot of organizations try to like make QuickBooks or something similar do grant management for them. And it just doesn't work well because it's just not structured to do that. The other thing we find is that accounting software needs to be pure for audits and for the IRS and all of that type of stuff, like the bean counters of the world. But grant management is a totally different animal, and you want to look at your money in a very different way. And so the very first thing we do is pull that financial information out of the accounting software and put it inside Atlas so that it's really easy to manipulate it the way that you need to. And then users set up their different funding sources. They can also set up like higher level programs, like the big initiatives that they're trying to do. And then those transactions are tagged with those things and the budget line items underneath them. So you're getting real-time budget versus actual information. You can, then add documents and tasks and all this other stuff that is sort of tertiary, but super, super important to this process. And so as you're thinking of applying for grants, as you're, moving them through the tracking and reporting process, all of these different things, all of these moving parts are being tracked in a single system rather than, a combination of your hard drive and Google Drive and Google Calendar and, conversations and all of these various different things that, things like COVID made extra difficult. So really just bringing everything together so that you have a one-stop shop for everything involved with your management and then future applications for other grants.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, do you have some sort of estimate of time savings or cost savings that nonprofit leaders can recognize by starting with grant with Atlas?
So at $10,000 in grant funding, we save money. Like, we save the organization money. So we actually on our website have like an ROI calculator where you can say, this is how much I have in grant funding, and it'll default to the average. But if you know how much the percentage, of your admin is taking, industry wide, yeah, it's about conservatively 10%, more closer to 20. So yeah, based on our price at $10,000, we're cheaper than doing it with people.
That is so cool. So, how can nonprofit leaders really understand the types of data they need to track in the grant management process so they can avoid waiting till the last minute to figure all of that out?
Yeah. So data is one of those crazy problems where you don't know you need it until you need it, and then now you don't have it. Um, so a lot of funders have started requiring in applications for you to say, this is what I'm going to track. So, like, that's a good way to make sure that you have to set up your system so that you're tracking that data. But really, it's what do you need to know? Like, and sometimes it's a matter of tracking too many things and then sort of paring that down. But I know, like, in the startup world, which is the world that I live in, um, key performance indicators, KPIs, is a really big thing. And it's, like, what are you trying to accomplish, and then work your way back to how do you measure that? And the old saying that what matters gets measured, or what's measured matters. So it's really like, what do you care about? What is your long-term goal? And in that is sort of this whole idea of making economic development a lot more data driven, and being able to say, we want to accomplish this thing, and we know based on our data, based on other people's data, that this works and that this doesn't. And so if we know that this works, and we know that this is, essentially the unit cost, um, and this is how much this should cost us to do, more or less. And so that's really the direction we're trying to push, is if you are wanting to eradicate homelessness, and if you are wanting to end food insecurity, how do you do that? And you have to have large amounts of data all over the country of different people trying different things and finding what works and finding what doesn't, and just experimenting to the point of being able to get quality data that everyone can use. And so it really just starts with track everything that you can that doesn't, take a bunch of time away from everything else that you're trying to do. Um, and do it in software, because it makes it really, really easy to analyze.
Yeah, can you give some examples of analyzing data? Because I think that's something that can feel really intimidating. Like it seems easy to track the data, but then how do you make it tell a story for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one good way to do that with data is comparison data. So obviously that and requires time, but if you can say, last year we, and I always default to homelessness. I don't know why, but it's just my, specific industry of choice. Um, if if last year we housed 5 families, and we got all of them out on their own, living life, funded by themselves, got them jobs, all this stuff, and none of them came back. That's very compelling. And then if a grant comes along, and this year you served 30 families and did that, like, that's huge. Like, just this bit of funding, 6x what you were doing. Those are the kinds of, like, data driven things, but also it's story led. You can go to those people and have them tell you their story, and that's compelling. And so I think sometimes, like, nonprofits get tripped up on data because it feels very, like, businessy. It doesn't have to be. It's just counting. It's just numbers. And so, like, that's obviously a very sort of small example, but inside of that, you can go back to, okay, what did it cost to do that? So what is the cost per family? And you can use that for fundraising. We know that it costs X dollars to house a family. And like, that makes it easy to go to donors with that information and get money that way too. So it's sort of this, again, cyclical thing where if you start being more data driven, everything gets a little bit easier.
And so we've been talking about the tracking, the analysis. How does Atlas help nonprofits with the grant reporting process?
Sure. So grant reporting is one of those things that's super varied, which stinks because, like, you don't always know what to expect until you've applied for the grant and gone through this whole thing. And now, oh my God, I have this, 20-page report I got to fill out on a quarterly basis or whatever. Um, and so at the, like, most basic level, we do, the budget versus actual, transaction reports, like things like that, that helps for internal management. Like, what have we spent on this? Do we need to, if we're overspending or underspending here, how can we move things around? Um, but then it also, like, we also build custom reports for customers. So we work with funders and recipients. So if a funder's like, hey, I want everyone to report this way, we can build that report, make it available to all of their recipients, and then they just click a button, run it, you're done. Um, and then on the recipient side, of course, we can help them build custom reports as well. What we're trying to do with that long term too is really question whether there should be 20-page grant reports. Can you prove what you did and that you did it well in a one-page report or with, 3 or 4 questions? And so getting a lot of feedback too, and giving feedback to funders on, hey, like a lot of the funders we have that are using the software, they don't have 20-page reports. I don't think this is necessary. And sort of building these network effects around what's a good way to report. So yeah, so at the most basic level, it's just click report, run, instead of having to export everything to a spreadsheet and then move everything around and sum everything and do all of these, special formulas inside Google Sheets or Excel or whatever, and spend a bunch of time doing that. We basically automate that whole process.
So I heard you mention funders a few times. So as I understand it, Atlas does not just work with grant award recipients, but also with funders on that side. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Atlas is actually the first software that brings funders and recipients together in a single platform, which is really, really cool for a number of reasons. So, for one, a lot of funders are also recipients. So, if you think of community foundations, municipalities, they all get money and then give it right back out. If you don't have two pieces of software or the time to, deal with quite literally dozens of spreadsheets, like you're in trouble. Like that's super, super time consuming. And so basically we allow them to see their money from both sides of things. The other part that's really cool is funders have data that recipients need, and recipients have data that funders need, and they're both tracking it separately. It's the exact same data. So why not make it available to each other? So things like budget versus actual. The funder wants to know this. Sometimes they want to know it on a quarterly basis. The recipient's tracking all of these things. Why not just make the aggregate data available to the funder and get rid of these quarterly reports? So just sort of bringing those two things together and sort of getting rid of like all this email communication that can take so much time and just slow down the whole process, just make it available to people. And inside that, that goes back to getting data about a large swath of industry to know what people are doing on both sides of things.
So what does it look like to get started working with Atlas?
Yeah, so we've tried to make it as easy as possible. So you can, if you go to our website, you can sign up for a 2-week free trial, and just test things out, play around. Um, but basically, if you want to get started, reach out to us. There's a link on the website, and we walk through the entire onboarding process. We basically take all of the data that you want entered into Atlas. We have you dump it into a Google Drive folder, and then we get everything set up. And then once all that's done, we set up all your accounts, turn you loose on it. We also do a lot of like hands-on stuff, because a lot of nonprofits they haven't used a lot of software before, or they're new to this, or they're like, we want to make sure everyone's trained and knows how to use this. Like we do all of that. And there's just like a one-time fee that's just equivalent to 1 month's worth of the subscription to get all that done. And we'll do as much as we need to there. So we tried to make it as easy and seamless as possible to switch this entire workflow from a very manual one to a very automated one. We're also getting ready to launch more of like a consultant side type of thing. So if someone's like, hey, I don't have people for this, for the love of God, please just manage this for me. We're happy to do that. And we also manage it for Atlas, inside Atlas for them. So they can access their data at any time. They can pull information out when they need to. They can still, manage their tasks and their documents and everything. We're just handling the financial side for them.
Very cool. So I know listeners are going to want to check out Atlas and learn more. How can they find Atlas online?
Yeah, so our website is getatlassolutions.com, and that should give you all the information you need.
That's awesome. What is one tip that my listeners can go away with today to improve their grant management?
Oh, it's a great question. So many things come to mind. I think the biggest one is deciding to be grant funded is a huge decision. Prepare now, whether you have one $5,000 grant or you just submitted your first applications, or you have 15 grants. Make sure that you're always prepared for 5 years down the road, so you're not rewriting your workflow every year as you grow. And that's one of the things that we're trying to accomplish, so that you don't have to rewrite that workflow every year.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for your time today, Ansley.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you.
you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.